Welcome back to another episode of LA Fishguys. I've often joked about this in the past and said, plumbers, their own pipes leak at home, bankers can't balance their own checkbooks, and mechanics drive the worst running cars. Well, aquarium service people have the dirtiest aquariums, and I'm certainly the first in line to admit that. You can see there's actually a 125-gallon tank sitting back there. It's a wannabe coral reef tank, but at the moment it's overwhelmed with algae, and you can see by the equipment and the jellyfish tanks that are sitting in front of it that it doesn't get a whole lot of attention. As a matter of fact, it probably only gets replenishment of water as well as foods twice a day. I have to admit, in this tough economy, it's been difficult to develop the interest in getting involved in the tank again, but the realities are twofold. One, there is an investment in that tank that one has to take care of. There are 4 rows of anemones in there, which are not inexpensive anemones, as well as a pair of percula clownfish that are probably pushing 10 years old, and they lay eggs every 2 weeks religiously. So one wants to make it a point to take care of that. The other reason is, in this as I mentioned, tough economy, it's a little difficult to come up with the energy or the interest or the motivation to step up and take on new projects, but at the same time, sitting around isn't making things any better either. So what I've decided to do is to work on this tank back here, starting first by getting the equipment away from the front of the tank. We'll move that out of the area. We're then going to install an algae scrubber onto the filter system in there with the expectation that it's going to resolve not only the algae problem in the tank, but it's going to allow me to introduce the number of fish that I've always wanted to put into the tank. I keep in mind, got into this as fish tanks prior to the reef aquarium phase, and even as the reef tank comes along, for all the advancements, improvements, I can't seem to add the number of fish I'd like. Always being fearful of the amount of food that I have to put into the tank to maintain that population of fish. That amount of food is going to cause algae problems. In fact, it's got to the point where people typically hardly put any fish into the tank, or certainly any food to maintain healthy fat fish, for fear of algae problems. And it's my belief, based on what I've seen so far, that the algae scrubber may be able to not only eliminate the algae problem, but deal with the amount of food that I would want to put into the tank to maintain the number of fish that I would like to keep. As I mentioned, there's a school of cardinal fish in there. Right now I think they're the blue-eyed cardinals. There's about 12 of them in there. I've also got some pajama cardinals and some Banggai cardinals in quarantine out in the garage that I'd like to introduce into the tank. Now, I'm fully aware that the compatibility issue between fishes and corals and anemones is still there, meaning you wouldn't want to put triggerfish in a tank that had shrimps in it, and you really probably wouldn't want to put butterfly fish or big angels in a tank that had an anemone in it. So I'm well aware of that, but there are a number of fish that I can keep in that tank that won't directly affect the corals or the anemones. Indirectly they might with the amount of waste or the amount of algae that waste would produce. But I come back to the algae scrubber. It's my belief that not only will it help me resolve the algae problem in there, of which we're going to witness through this episode, but it'll also help me to maintain a higher population of fish, more specifically introduce an abundance of food to maintain that population of fish, and that algae scrubber will deal or consume the nutrients as a result of that higher amount of fish. There's a couple of other things that I want to achieve here, and as I mentioned, this tougher economy, if I can do anything to decrease the operating costs of that aquarium, that benefits me in the pocketbook. And in this particular case, that tank has, we'll call it a Velocity brand water pump. It's an extremely quiet pump and fairly reliable. I've had good luck with it. Unfortunately, it'll add probably 3 degrees of heat to your aquarium water, which is going to most likely require a refrigeration unit, and for that refrigeration unit to probably run more to deal with that higher amount of level of heat. So I'm going to switch out the water pump. I'm going to put an Iwaki, the Japanese brand, the Japanese version of the Iwaki brand water pump on there, which my expectation again is that it will run cooler, and as such it will cause the refrigeration unit to come on less. The other thing that I want to do is I want to add what's called a sea swirl, which is an oscillating discharge nozzle into the tank. And my reason for it is schooling fish, when threatened, will cluster together. Not that I want to create an environment where the fish are always feeling defensive or have to be on the offense, but I want to create an environment where they typically would move around together more as a school. And with the static type flow that's currently set up in the tank, flow coming from the left, flow coming from the right, there's no real variation. By adding a sea swirl to at least one of those sides will cause an imbalance or a rotation in the flow of water within the system, and it may force those cardinal fish to school a little bit more. And I think it's kind of cool to watch a school of cardinals face one direction and maybe all together as a group all of a sudden adjust themselves to face the flow coming in the opposite direction. So come along with us as we kind of overhaul the aquarium. We add the algae scrubber. You can see if it resolves the algae problem as well as improves my ability to increase the amount of food to increase the amount of fish. So let's get to work. You can see, or rather maybe you can't see, that that's a pretty dirty aquarium. That's a lot of coralline algae that's growing on those acrylic panels. And beyond that is an abundance of hair algae. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, our goal here is really twofold. One, to get myself back involved in my own aquarium, to kind of reconnect or reattach to the hobbyist inside of me. And two, to try to make a more effective or efficient system. Effective in the sense that it will be able to more greatly handle the number of fish that I want to put into the tank, or more so the amount of food that I need to put into the tank for the number of fish. And two, a filter system that's more capable of eliminating the current problem, that being an algae problem, more specifically a hair algae problem. And that filter system, in this case the algae scrubber, not only is going to suck up or draw up or consume the nutrients within the water itself, but they'll also begin to draw out the nutrients that have been locked up inside the rocks. Have you ever noticed in the past the algae seem to be only on the live rock and not necessarily on the sand? That's probably because all the nutrients were also locked up inside the rocks themselves. So the first step in any good project is to start with a clean working area. That way you don't have to run into any safety issues, or it allows you to clearly see what it is or what you need to do. In this particular case, I think we need to clean the acrylic panels in those aquariums. We'll start first with our aquarium cleaning magnets. This will probably be the quickest way to take care of it. It's not going to eliminate it 100%, and we're ultimately going to have to go in there and scrape some of those coralline spots off the acrylic itself. We also have to be real careful using the aquarium cleaning magnets, because we could easily chip off a piece of that calcareous algae. It could get trapped underneath the magnet, and as we go back and forth, it may have a switchblade effect, scratching the acrylic before we actually realize what we've done. So we need to be careful doing that as well.
And to start the job, we want to first lie down something to capture any spills and drips. With our working area clean and protected, we can now open up the canopy on top of the tank.
Looks like we also need to replace a couple of light bulbs in here as well.
We'll now reach into the tank, placing the inside magnet and allowing the outside magnet to couple together. We then start sliding the two magnets slowly back and forth, making sure that we don't see any scratches as a result. Feeling confident that we're not scratching the aquarium with our current action, we'll go ahead and speed up the process. Again, the thing that we want to make a point to keep an eye out for is chipping off a piece of that calcareous algae and that broken piece getting stuck underneath the aquarium cleaning magnet. Before we would realize it, we would be creating a Zorro effect across the face of the tank. So you have to pay attention.
So you can see that's really stirred up things in the aquarium to the point where you could hardly see in there. But then again, what difference was that than when we started? For now, we'll let that go ahead and settle. Let's take a look at the filter system and what we want to do to modify it down here in the cabinet below. So, I guess the first thing we see is a few cobwebs, which would be an indication there's not been much entry into that cabinet for a while. The second thing we see is some rat turds, so I'd have to say that a mouse or a rat is probably the one who has been in this cabinet here recently. And that's the pump that we want to take out. And let's see here, oh my goodness gracious. Wet dry trickle filter minus the bioballs, replaced with live rock, protein skimmer, and an abundance of salt creep. So I think the next thing we want to do, again going back to that clean the work area, is get a little shop vac out here and get the inside of this cabinet cleaned up so we can work on it in a health conscious manner.
Next time you're near Long Beach, California, take the time to stop in at Age of Aquariums, 2642 Cherry Avenue, just off the 405 freeway near Signal Hill. Age of Aquariums carries a full line of dry goods, supplements, and exotic equipment. Age of Aquariums also carries a wide assortment of living corals, coral frags, as well as fresh and saltwater fish, ranging from the usual, the unusual, and the bizarre. Age of Aquariums is located at 2642 Cherry Avenue, Long Beach, California, near Signal Hill. Open 7 days a week. Call 562-438-6252 or visit ageofaquariums.biz. Tropical Fish Hobbyist Magazine has been the authoritative source for aquarium keepers since the first legendary issue rolled off the presses in 1952. With informative articles month after month about the fascinating world of freshwater aquariums, saltwater setups, paludariums, ponds, and more, illustrated in crisp detail by the world's top aquatic photographers. TFH covers it all. And now, with subscriptions starting at $13.95 and a mobile digital edition you can take with you wherever you go, TFH is your ultimate resource for all things aquatic.
Hello, my name is Jim Stime. I'm with Midwater Systems, and I'm the developer of the Jelly Aquarium. The Jelly Aquarium is a tank designed specifically for the keeping of jellyfish. I offer 5 different sizes of tanks designed to be built into a wall or a freestanding cabinet. I also offer the inexpensive Mini Jelly Aquarium, which has its filter system built into its backside. Additionally, I offer tank-raised moon jellyfish, as well as a line of tanks designed for producing your own jellyfish. For more information on this fascinating world of keeping jellyfish, visit jellyaquarium.com. So it's now been a few hours. The water in the tank has cleared up a little bit, certainly enough for you to begin to see the amount of hair algae that's overwhelmed the inside of the tank. Here are some of those blue-eyed cardinals. There might be a more different common name for them, but I'm going to refer to them as blue-eyed cardinals. And there is a chocolate tang in the tank, and a pair of percula clownfish. Wouldn't surprise me if there's a batch of eggs down underneath there. And so our goal is to get the inside of the tank cleaned up as far as being able to see inside there. I'll probably end up doing a little bit of a water change, and then we're going to deal with the cleaning of the cabinet area. See, that already looks better, and I'm already feeling better about things. So now that we've got the cabinet area kind of vacuumed up and got all the big chunky dirt stuff out of there, we can more clearly see the equipment and get a better idea as to what our capabilities are, or what our tasks will end up being. We can tidy up the electrical ballast and such for the lighting system, maybe elevate that on top of that grid arrangement there. That's the little velocity water pump, and it's a great little pump. I mean, you can't hear it. I mean, it's extremely quiet. Unfortunately, you can't put your hand on the pump for very long without hurting yourself, because it's really warm, and you just know that that's influencing the water temperature. And then the other issue is fitting our algae scrubber. We're going to go with the Santa Monica Model 100 algae scrubber, which should be more than adequate for this tank. It's going to have to hang off the end. In other words, it'll use one end of the wet-dry trickle filter to support itself, but it's going to have to hang over this direction, so we'll have to create a stand of some sorts to support that. The other issue that I'm dealing with is there's really not enough room to run that algae scrubber and this Euro Reef protein skimmer. And even though the protein skimmer really isn't producing anything, I would really don't want to remove it, and I'm having a hard time dealing with that. I paid good money for it, but that's not the real issue. The problem that I foresee is I know that when you take these type of water pumps, this particular one, out of the water and allow it to dry out, there's always a tendency for the impeller magnet or the inside of the motor sump to swell, and that kind of ruins the pump from being used again. So you end up having to buy a $100 water pump again, if not a little bit more, because it's got a special needle wheel on there. So I'm having a hard time discontinuing the use of the unit, but again, I don't have the space to put both of them in there. At the very least, I certainly don't have enough space at the bottom to squeeze an extra water pump in. You can see this was a wet-dry style trickle filter with the bioballs removed, and now it's just got live rock in there, and you can actually see yellow sponge growing, proliferating, no pun intended, in the sump there as part of the biological filter, or as Steve Tyree would call it, the cryptic environment. So we've gone ahead and kind of tidied up this area where the lighting ballasts were. We used this egg crate grid that I'd made for some other project and was kind of just storing it down here. We've used that to elevate those electronic components off the floor of the cabinet. If there were a flood of some sorts, anything sitting on the floor of the cabinet obviously is going to be exposed much quicker to any of that water flowing out of the tank or the filter. So we've elevated the electrical components off the floor of the cabinet and again cleaned that area up. We're now ready to start looking at replacing that water pump. Okay, we're now ready to switch out the water pump. That's the existing Velocity brand pump. This is the new Japanese Iwaki water pump. The intent is that it will run cooler. The one thing I am expecting, unfortunately, is a slight increase in noise, because again, this pump here is almost whisper quiet, but unfortunately it adds about 3 degrees of heat to the water. We have our plug that we had to go put on. Again, this being an international pump, doesn't arrive with a plug-in, so we dashed to the hardware store and got that. The other thing that we've done is I've raised the discharge nozzles in the tank so that they're up and out of the water. That way when we unplug the water pump, which does not have a valve on its discharge side, it does on the inlet side, but not on the discharge side. So when we turn the water pump off, it'll back siphon the minimal amount back into the system. And I've also got a bucket that once I take that snap clamp off, I'll be able to capture the water in the tubing. So I'm going to go ahead and thread or tape up with some Teflon tape the ends of the water pump, and then we'll go ahead and unplug the old one and do the switcheroo as far as water pumps are concerned.
To minimize air or water leakage, we'll go ahead and wrap the in and outlet threads of the water pump with some Teflon tape. Once we're ready, we can unplug the current pump, close its union ball valve on the inlet side, slip the hose off the barbed discharge side of the pump, and remove that old pump out of the system. I'm going to use both of the fittings off the old pump and place them onto the new pump for what hopefully will be an easy switch out of the two pumps.
So the new water pump is in place. We just need to put the snap clamp on the end, open up that valve, allow the pump itself to get primed, and we can then plug it in and see if there's any change in the amount of water flow as well as the amount of noise that it might make. So the new water pump is in, and unfortunately you can definitely hear it. And I'm a little surprised that it's kind of that noticeable, but everybody's got mouse pads sitting around at home, and you can easily slip a mouse pad underneath the pump, and that will noticeably dampen the vibration. And what's happening is there's a vibration as a result of the impeller assembly spinning inside the water pump, and it tends to set up kind of a harmonics, or the cabinet, more specifically the floor of the cabinet, enhances or amplifies it. So by putting the mouse pad underneath there, we've dampened that noise considerably. So was there any improvement in water flow? I'd have to say it's pretty close to what was in there before, which I'm guessing is around 600 gallons an hour. So at this point, the main goal is to determine is there a drop in temperature, and the one marked out is currently water temperature, the one marked in is air temperature in the room. So we'll monitor that, and again the goal is hopefully that it won't peak over 80 and require that refrigeration unit to come on. I have to admit it'll probably take a little bit of getting used to that increase in the noise, and I don't mean to make it sound really bad. The reality is you're gonna have some noise, but those velocity pumps were extremely quiet, so there's a real trade-off there, noise versus heat influence. Which do you want to deal with?
Join us, if you will, for part 2 of this 7-part series of cleaning my own tank, as we remove the protein skimmer from the system and install an algae scrubber to help eliminate the algae and improve my own tank.